Hello and welcome to another Magic Duels gameplay. Today we're taking a look at a red-green deck called Monster Madness, and the monster part refers to red-green monsters, which is an archetype that usually plays very large and efficient creatures, and the madness part refers to the mechanic, because we have a lot of cards that let us discard cards, so having madness cards in our deck means we get to cast them for free for their madness cost. It's a very synergistic deck that also has a lot of the aftermath cards, which are also beneficial to discard sometimes because you still get to cast the aftermath side of the card. So that's the idea behind the deck. And then of course we have a lot of very efficient and scary creatures. So let's take a look at the entire deck, starting out with a Lightning Axe. Nice efficient removal spell. For only a single red we can deal 5 damage to a creature, but as an additional cost we have to discard a card or pay 5 generic mana. Most of the time we will be discarding a card, but as I've mentioned, that's not really a drawback in this deck sometimes. Then we have a Bloodrage Brawler, which is another card that's very efficient for its mana cost, 2 mana for a 4/3, but when it enters a battlefield we have to discard a card, but again, not really a drawback in this deck. And then another discard outlet for 2 mana is Furyblade Vampire, 2 mana for a 1/2 with trample, and at the beginning of combat we can discard a card to give the vampire +3/+0 until end of turn. So yet another cheap way to discard cards, which is a setup for the following turns of the deck. We also have Sylvan Advocate as just an efficient beater. 2 mana, 2/3 vigilance, and then as soon as we hit land number 6 it turns into a 4/5 creature. And then of course we can't go wrong with Smuggler's Copter, which also helps us draw and discard and put maybe some of those value cards in the graveyard or enable madness. And then we get to our 3-drops, where we have a Rhonas the Indomitable, which is a 3 mana god, so it's a 5/5 that's indestructible. Rhonas also has Death Touch and can't attack or block unless we control a creature with power 4 or greater, but as you've seen, lots of our creatures are very big, so enabling Rhonas is not a problem, and also has an activated ability for 2 and a green to give a creature +2/+0 and trample until end of turn, so great with those large creatures. Then of course the obligatory Tireless Trackers. Then we have Fiery Temper, which is a great card to discard to our various effects that we've covered earlier, especially if you can go turn 3, Bloodrage Brawler and madness out a Fiery Temper. And then of course just fine by itself, 3 mana instant speed to deal 3 damage to a creature or player. Then we have Heaven to Earth, which is another aftermath card. So the front side, the Heaven, is an instant that deals X damage to each creature with flying, so it can maybe take out some Copter tokens, later maybe even a Smuggler's Copter. And then the Earth side, the aftermath side, is a sorcery, so this one's not an instant, and deals X damage to each creature without flying. Most of the time our creatures will be larger than the opponents, which means that Earth can be a one-sided sweeper, which is very powerful. And then of course we can also just discard Heaven to Earth to one of our many effects and still get the benefit of Earth in our graveyard. We also have Hazoret the Fervent, another god. This one's a 4 mana 5/4 with indestructible and haste, can't attack or block unless we have 1 or fewer cards in hand, but as you've seen we've got a lot of ways to discard cards, so it's not a big problem to enable Hazoret, and then also has an ability for 2 and a red to discard a card and deal 2 damage to each opponent, which also helps enable her, so she can start attacking as a 5/4. Then we have 2 copies of Heart-Piercer Manticore, which is another interesting one. So 4 mana for a 4/3. When it enters the battlefield, we can sacrifice another creature, and if we do, the Manticore deals damage to a creature or player equal to the sacrificed creature's power. And then it also has Embalm, so we can get it back from the graveyard for 6 mana, which means that this is a fine creature to play by itself, but we can also discard it and still get some value later in the game with the Embalm. We also have Crocodile of the Crossing, another very efficient beatdown creature, 4 mana for a 5/4 with haste, that puts a -1/-1 counter on one of our creatures. Then we get to our 5-drops, where we have 2 copies of Glorybringer, just an excellent creature by itself, 5 mana for 4 flying haste, and we can exert it to deal 4 damage to a non-dragon creature. We We also have Verdurous Gearhulk, another very big efficient creature, 5 mana 4/4 trample that distributes 4 +1/+1 counters. We also include Samut, Voice of Dissent, which is an interesting addition from Amonkhet. 5 mana 3/4 flash, double strike, vigilance and haste, and other creatures we control have haste. We don't have any white mana in this deck, so the last ability is not going to be relevant, but plenty of text already, so most of the time you'll just be using Samut to maybe ambush the opponent's creatures with flash, and then in the subsequent turns all your creatures have haste, which is very beneficial in a deck playing large green creatures. We also have Honored Hydra, which is actually one of the best creatures we can discard in this deck, since by itself it's a 6 mana 6/6 trampler, but it also has Embalm, and the Embalm cost is only 4, so if we can discard this in the early turns, on turn 4 we can Embalm the Hydra and get a nice 6/6 trampler, plus whatever benefit we got from discarding the Hydra in the first place. Then we get some more Aftermath cards. We've got Insult to Injury, so Insult doubles all of the damage that we would deal in our turn, which means not only damage from creatures, but also damage from instants and sorceries, which plays well with the injury side if we can cast them both in the same turn. Injury deals 2 damage to a creature and 2 damage to target player, so if you can cast Insult and then Injury, you can deal 4 damage to a creature and 4 damage to a player. And then of course, combined with our very large creatures, Insult can also just close out the game out of nowhere. And then of course, discarding Insult to Injury means we can still cast the injury side from the graveyard. And then we also have Mouth to Feed, so Mouth makes a 3/3 green hippo creature token, and then Feed lets us draw cards equal to the number of creatures with power 3 or greater that we control, and we have a lot of large creatures in this deck. And Feed also combines nicely with cards like Furyblade Vampire, which we can grow, attack with her, and then second main phase cast Feed to draw an extra card. Also works well with Sylvan Advocate, which can grow larger later in the game. We can also crew Smuggler's Copter before casting Feed to draw an extra card, so there's a lot of synergy there. And then our mana base, very simple, 9 mountains, 7 forests, 2 CInder Glades, 2 Rootbound Crag, and the full 4 Evolving Wilds to go with Tireless Tracker. So that's the deck. Now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, let's have a look at our opener, which looks alright, although we only have the 1 creature here, no way to discard or Fiery Temper or Insult, so I think actually we can do a bit better than this. And yep, this looks a little better. Do need a bunch of lands here, but we have a Brawler we can play on turn 2, which should buy us enough time. And I think we'll discard the Heart-Piercer Manticore here when we do play the Brawler, as we can still get it back with Embalm. And another 5-drop is not exactly what we needed with this hand, so we could just discard a 5-drop. But I think these 5-drops are pretty good at getting us back into the game when we're behind. That I'm okay discarding the Manticore here. So let's see if the opponent has an answer to the Brawler. Alright, they're Jeskai colors, so they can have plenty of removal spells here. Harness Lightning, Blessed Alliance, you name it, and there's land number 3. Alright, so let's go ahead and attack and see if we can get in for 4. And there's a Blessed Alliance. And we'll go ahead and grab a mountain with our Evolving Wilds here. And then hopefully we draw another land next turn to go with our Tireless Tracker. Or perhaps we can just play out the Crocodile as well. But I think if we draw a land, it's probably better to go with the Tracker, just because that means even if we don't draw land number 5, we still have a good play in Crocodile. While if we play the Crocodile first and don't hit land number 5, then Tracker is a much worse play, since we don't get value from it right away. So yeah, let's go with the Tracker. And play a land. And then next turn we can play out Crocodile. And we can see where we put the -1/-1 counter. If we draw land number 5, of course, that would be great. Then we can look at our other potential plays. Opponent with 4 lands says go. And there's a land, perfect. So we get another clue as well. And we have plenty of options here. I kind of like running out our weaker threat first, which would be the Crocodile. Also plays around potential sensors from the opponent. And we'll put the counter on another interesting question. I think we put it on the Crocodile itself here. And do we get to a hit for 7? We do, so our opponent might have Glimmer of Genius that they want to cast here. And nope, instead nothing on turn 4 for the opponent. So they might have a sweeper instead here. For 5 mana. And yep, there's the Planar Outburst. But we still get to follow up with a hasty Glorybringer. Plus we still have 2 clues we can sacrifice at any point. Furyblade Vampire, not super exciting here, so I think it's still better to run out the Glorybringer. Also, we can't forget our Heart-Piercer Manticore, which in combination with the Verdurous Gearhulk can certainly finish off an opponent. So let's get in for 4 now, put the opponent at 9, and then they'll have to answer the Glorybringer. We will not be exerting, of course. So the opponent with potentially 6 mana, and yep, there's an untapped 6th land. They go with a Sphinx's Tutelage, alright, so we know what our opponent was up to. They're trying to mill us out with Sphinx's Tutelage. And they say go. So we could tap out for the Verdurous Gearhulk here, but that would be pretty painful if our opponent has another Blessed Alliance. So instead I think I like sacking another clue just to see what we can draw, and then just playing a Furyblade Vampire. Hazoret's also nice, especially since we can empty our hand pretty easily with the Furyblade and the Lightning Axe. So let's go ahead and attack for 4, see if we can connect, or if our opponent has another Blessed Alliance. And there it is. At least they didn't get to gain any life off of it. So we'll sack Glorybringer, play Furyblade Vampire in our second main phase. And if we draw land next turn, we could play out Hazoret, discard a card with the Furyblade, and hit for a whole bunch. Otherwise we can even consider Lightning Axing one of our own creatures. And our opponent goes for a Jace, Unraveler of Secrets, which is going to plus. So our opponent's not afraid of our Furyblade Vampire, meanwhile our opponent keeps milling with the tutelage. So opponent might have an answer for the Furyblade Vampire here, as they play another untapped land, but they are down to 3 cards in hand, and we did draw a land. So I think it's time to play out our Hazoret. Run out Evolving Wilds, and then move to combat, discard the Lightning Axe with the Furyblade and attack with both. And our opponent's probably a creatureless deck, so Lightning Axe is not gonna do much. And we'll just attack our opponent for 9. If they don't have an answer, they're dead. Even if they do, we still have our Embalm creatures in the graveyard. And with our opponents being a mill deck, they actually put a lot of valuable cards for us in the graveyard, which is one of their downsides, so we can actually have a look at what they put in the graveyard. Alright, just Manticore for now, but if they put another Manticore in there, or maybe an Insult to Injury, we could have also gotten some extra cards from our graveyard, which is always nice. So yeah, let's move on to the next one. Alright, let's take a look at our opener, which has double CInder Glade, which is a little awkward, but I think it's still worth keeping here, since we do have lots of powerful 2-drops. So hopefully we can pick up an untapped land here in our first few draw steps, and there we go. Let's just play a tapped CInder Glade, and then if we do draw an untapped land, like another forest or mountain, then of course the second CInder Glade will come into play untapped, so no reason to run out the forest there. And their opponent on green-black with a Longtusk Cub. So if they get to connect with that, it could be pretty scary. So we want to try and avoid our opponents hitting us with the Cub, which means playing either the Brawler or the Advocate. So the problem with playing the Advocate is that if our opponent can make 2 energy somehow, then they still get to attack into the Advocate, while they can't with the Brawler. At least we get to trade. But of course, if they have a removal spell, I would rather run out the Advocate than the Brawler, since this costs us a card. So a tricky spot for sure. I think I would rather run out the Advocate, since I think it's more likely that our opponent can play removal spell next turn than it is that they get 2 energy in green-black. Let's see if they have a removal spell here. They have a Copter, alright. And no attacks, that's good. So now we have the option of playing the Brawler or the Copter. Unfortunately, can't play this untapped, so we can't Brawler plus Fiery Temper, but we can do that next turn. So yeah, I think we just play out the Copter here, and we can leave up red-green here, so that we could potentially madness out the Fiery Temper if we have to block with the Smuggler's Copter here. And of course we can't attack with our Advocate because our opponent can crew the Smuggler's Copter. If we attacked, we could have represented having a removal spell for the Copter, but I think the risk doesn't outweigh the benefit. And there we see Winding Constrictor. So can our opponent generate energy now? No, instead they just have another Longtusk Cub. So definitely want to get rid of the Constrictor here if we can. Otherwise these Longtusk Cubs are gonna be very scary. So we can just run out the Brawler, madness out Fiery Temper. Or we can even try to crew the Copter, but I think we have to play defense here with 2 Longtusk Cubs. I don't want to start tapping our creatures to attack with Copter. So yeah, let's just play it safe. Play the Brawler, madness out Fiery Temper, killing the Constrictor. And get a nice 4-3 in play, and then our 5-drops can hopefully carry us to victory. Opponent is going to crew their Copter, and I think I'm okay with blocking with our Copter. If our opponent has removal, that's fine, means that our 5-drops are more likely to survive. We can first let the opponent draw and discard with the Copter before we have to crew, just to get a bit more information. Opponent discards Scrap Heap, that's nice for them since they can get it back. Let's just go ahead and crew. and see if our opponent wants to trade or if they want to kill the Copter. So we get to draw and discard as well. And I think we actually discard the Brawler here. And the trade happens. And no play from the opponent. And there's a Fiery Temper we can cast. So if we attack, our opponents could potentially animate the Hissing Quagmire, which we could kill with Fiery Temper. And they can also return a Scrap Heap Scrounger potentially. So I think we just attack with the Advocate, keep the Brawler on defense, and see what happens. So opponent not interested in animating with the Quagmire. So we can just say go here. And our opponent did not return the Scrap Heap end of turn. That's interesting. Maybe they forgot. And still no attacks. That's also good for us. So let's go ahead and grab a mountain. So now we have land number 6 for the Sylvan Advocate, which means we can still attack into the opponent. If they try to block with the Quagmire, we still have our Fiery Temper play. And again, I think we want to keep the Brawler on defense. So let's see if they do go with the Quagmire. Or if they just take it. It looks like they're just going to take 4. So it looks like an end of turn Samut here. Opponent has Fatal Push for the Advocate, so they wanted to see if we maybe had something better to play, and then decided to pull the trigger on the Fatal Push. Scrap Heap does come back now, which can attack into the Brawler, but we do have the Samut, which can just eat the Scrap Heap here. And opponent does attack with the Scrap Heap, and I think we do just run out Samut here. If our opponent has removal, they're gonna get Samut either way, unless it's sorcery speed, I guess. So that works. Opponent with their own Sylvan Advocate, which we can't kill with Fiery Temper as our opponent has 6 lands already. Alright, so opponent did not seem to have removal for Samut, which means I think we just go all in with Verdurous Gearhulk on the Samut, as giving a double striking creature +1/+1 counters is pretty sweet. You get to distribute 4 +1/+1 counters. Let's say we put 3 here and 1 here, meaning the Gearhulk can still attack into the Advocate. Then this would be a 6-power double striker, which means we still get to kill both Cubs, and even both Cubs and the Hissing Quagmire, and not get killed. So yeah, I think that's what we want to do here. So let's play out Gearhulk, put 3 counters on Samut, 1 on the Gearhulk. And I think we just attack with both our large creatures here. And see what happens. Opponent double blocks the Gearhulk, that's fine, so we'll put the Advocate first, then the Cub. Opponent takes 12 from Samut, which means they are just dead to this Fiery Temper if they can't gain any life. And it looks like that's gonna be the case. Opponent with an Ether Hub now, gains 1 energy, but yeah, these Long-Tusk Cubs never were able to attack past our blockers, which meant they didn't get to get out of hand, which was good for us, but not good for the opponent. So can even run out the Vampire to Madness out the Fiery Temper, but let's just attack and then see our opponent blocks. as our opponent could potentially gain life at instant speed here. So our opponent's blocking with the Quagmire like that, and jumping there, so that's fine. We can just play around something that gains the opponent life at instant speed, since we can respond with the Fiery Temper, and as long as we're not losing on board, I don't think there's a reason to go for it, even though it's very unlikely that the opponent can gain life here. So okay, now that they went for the Scrap Heap activation, only have 1 mana up, that's a good window to cast our Fiery Temper. Alright, sweet, on to the next one. Okay, let's have a look at our opener. We're on the play. We have 2 2-drops that we can play. This hand's a little sketchy since we don't have any green mana. But if we can find green mana, I think this hand's quite good. So I think we'll keep. So now the question is, do we play out the Vampire or the Brawler turn 2? Probably the Brawler, unless we expect removal from the opponent, as we see Dread Wanderer. Opponent could be on a zombie deck, could be on a mono black aggro deck. Alright, there's our Rootbound Crag. So given that, I think I do like running out the Brawler, just because it can block the Wanderer here. And we can discard Insult to Injury here, which gives us access to the injury part to maybe take care of a creature from the opponent next turn. Although running out Rhonas is probably better. So yeah, let's run out a Brawler, discard Insult. And see if our opponent has removal for the Brawler. Black-white, so probably zombies. And there's a Fatal Push, unfortunately. But at least the opponent didn't get to add a zombie to the board this turn. So we do have the option of playing Rhonas here, and if we draw a 4th land, we can play the Manticore, which enables Rhonas, which I think probably has the highest upside. Don't really want to injury a Dread Wanderer, so sure, let's run out Rhonas and hope to draw land. Also have the option of playing the Furyblade, discarding a card main phase so it has 4 power so we can attack with the Rhonas, although that's not very appealing given that we have to discard a card. And we're pretty far away from embalming a Manticore. So if our next 2 draws are just lands, I think we can probably win this game. Opponent with a Diregraph Colossus, which we kind of want to take care of here. And we do have injury in the graveyard. Opponent decided not to attack with a Dread Wanderer, which is interesting. So they are giving us the opportunity to kill the Diregraph Colossus, but we did draw the land for the Manticore, which would let us attack with the Rhonas. Letting a Diregraph Colossus get out of hand seems like a bad idea. So we probably should just take care of that. Opponent could maybe have a second copy. But I don't really want to risk our opponent untapping and then playing 2 zombies, making 2 tokens. I think we can wait a turn with playing out the Manticore. So let's just cast Injury here. And say go. Opponent with the second Diregraph Colossus, which explains why they were so eager to run out the first one, but that's fine. And now they do attack with the Dread Wanderer. So now we just have to try and apply as much pressure as possible. And alright, we drew Fiery Temper, so now we can actually run out the Furyblade, main phase discard Fiery Temper, Madness to kill the Colossus and still attack with Rhonas. That seems like an efficient turn, so let's go with that. Kill the Colossus. Get in for 5. And if we draw a 5th land, we could play the Gearhulk, discard the Manticore to pump the Vampire, and just threaten a lethal if our opponent doesn't have any blockers back. Pretty unlikely, but you never know. Alright, so our opponent is leaving back the zombie now, and they do have white mana up, which could mean they have the card that can exile a creature that's being blocked by a zombie, which would be pretty unfortunate with our Rhonas situation. So given that we drew another Fiery Temper, I think we just Madness Fiery Temper, killing the Wanderer, and get in for 9. And we can even pump the Vampire for 2 with Rhonas. So I think that's the plan here. So we will be discarding, killing the Wanderer. Let's see if our opponent has a response. Fatal Push would be able to kill Vampire anyways, instead it's Anguished Unmaking. So here we want to use the ability before he dies. So our opponent would have been able to do that no matter what, but we still get in for 6. Plus, next turn we also have the option of giving the Vampire 3 extra power and then just playing the Heart-Piercer Manticore, which just deals our opponent 4 damage if we sacrifice the Vampire. Opponent with a Wayward Servant. Do they have a follow-up zombie? They do, Cryptbreaker. So they're not just dead to the Manticore plus Vampire combo. And there's a 5th land, but it's an Evolving Wilds. So I think we do just pump the Vampire attack, see if our opponent wants to trade, and then run out the Manticore here. So let's go to combat. Discard Evolving Wilds. Attack for 4, and their opponent's likely to block here, but of course their Vampire has Trample. They could still have that Exile Blocked Creature card. Nope, looks like they just take 2. And I think we do run out a Manticore here, even though we could sandbag it to maybe deal the last points of damage to our opponent. So this is only an other creature, so we can't actually sacrifice the Manticore itself. But now if we draw a 5th land, we are in a good spot. And the Manticore also has Embalm, so we do have kind of a late game situation set up. Opponent with Kalitas, Traitor of Geth. That's unfortunate, so that means they do have a way to gain some life back, so would really like a land here. Alright. So now if we play out the Gearhulk, opponent is forced to chump with the Cryptbreaker. So I think we just put 2 counters on the Manticore. Means it has 5 toughness, survives a double block. Opponent doesn't gain any zombies. And then we still have a 6/6 Gearhulk, which should be plenty. Opponent could also sacrifice a zombie next turn, making Kalitas into a 5/6. So there, having a 6/6 Gearhulk and a 6/5 Manticore still seems fine. So yeah, let's just run out the Gearhulk and go 2 and 2. Attack for 6, opponent likely just chumps with the Cryptbreaker. And let's see if they can stabilize with some removal spells plus Kalitas here. Also, Kalitas exiling the Manticore means we don't get to Embalm it, which is very relevant. And looks like our opponent did not have a removal spell here. So they're gonna run out Lord of the Accursed, which is just a chum blocker. And Sylvan Advocate's not bad either. So if we attack with both, opponent can double block the Heart-Piercer, but then they gain 3 and take 6, so that's no good. So yeah, they're just in a double chum block mode here. Opponent does gain 3. Not afraid of a sweeper here out of the zombie deck. So let's just play out the Advocates. Opponent has land number 5, but no play. And there's an Tireless Tracker. Won't be needing her. Attack with everyone. Alright, sweet. I want to thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this gameplay. And as always, have a nice day.